Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Are We on the Same Page? I'm your host, Dave Thomas Rocker, and this video is my second out of six in my series on the history of invention. And I'm going through 6 eras of human history. I'm up to the second one now, namely ancient times. So today I'm going to talk about what I think are the top 20 inventions of ancient times, which I'm defining as being between around 10,000 BC, which was the beginning of agriculture, basically, and around 500 AD, which was roughly the end of the Roman Empire. Anyway, let's begin. So, before we begin, once again, I want to give a plug for my book called My Spiritual Journey. I don't know how many of you guys have bought this book, but it's available on Amazon. Just you can do a search on Amazon.com and search for my name, Dave Thomas Rocker. That's my pen name, and you can also search for the title, My Spiritual Journey. But I suggest you first use my name because there's other books on Amazon also called My Spiritual Journey. It's a pretty common title. And I think you'll enjoy it. I think it's a pretty good book. I spent about a year and a half writing it. It's a bunch of quotes about, mostly one line quotes about how I think you can live a better life. And, it's about the things I think are important in life. You may disagree with some of them, and that's fine. But at least I think you'll find it interesting. So you might want to check it out. And it's available both in paperback for, I think, $30 and on Kindle for $9. So check it out. I think you'll like it. Anyway, so now I'm gonna start the video on what I consider the 20 greatest inventions of ancient times. And like I said, I'm dividing human history into 6 eras. And the last one last week, I'm gonna do these each week. Last week I did one on the Stone Age. I did the top 10 inventions of the Stone Age, which is prehistoric times from around 5 million BC to about 10,000 BC. I only did 10 because, well, for one thing, we don't have historical records of these inventions. We just kind of know based on archaeology, roughly when they were invented, and we don't know who invented any of these things, but we do know that we've had some monumental inventions in the Stone Age, but we don't know that many, which is why I only featured 10. But for every other era, I'm going to feature 20, except for the Middle Ages. There wasn't a lot of invention in the Middle Ages. It was also known as the Dark Ages for a reason, because people were pretty much in the dark most of that time. There was a lot of superstition, going on, at least in Europe. And there wasn't as much invention or innovation in the Middle Ages. That's why I'm only going to feature 10 inventions in the Middle Ages, but I'll feature 20 of each of the following years: the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and modern times, since all those periods involved a great deal of invention and innovation. So anyway, that's going to be 100 inventions altogether, and I'm not ranking them from 100 to 1 because I think it's a very hard thing to do, but probably easier to rank them by era, and it probably makes more sense to do so too because it's hard to compare inventions from different eras. Anyway, enough of that. So now I'm going to get started with what I consider the greatest 20 inventions of ancient times. So let's start with number 20. Number 20 on my list is alcoholic beverages, which were invented around 7000 BC. And I know not everybody drinks alcoholic beverages. I do on occasions. I'm not a big drinker. Most of the people I know drink a lot more than I do. I hate getting drunk. But when I was in college, I used to get drunk every weekend because everybody else was. I was under a lot of peer pressure to do so. And even though I don't think drinking is a good thing in general, at least getting drunk isn't. I mean, alcohol's a drug, and there's a lot of other drugs too. A lot of drugs we smoke, a lot of pills, but alcohol I think was the first drug ever used, as far as I know. I don't know. Maybe we smoked pipes before we had alcohol. I really don't know, but I mean, it's been used as a form of recreation throughout pretty much all of human history, and I don't think the world would be the same without alcohol. You don't have to get drunk. You can just have one or two drinks and still have a good time. Anyway, so I think it was an important invention. That's why I listed. And number 19, Another form of recreation, board games and dice games. And I'm a big game player. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I love games. I've loved games all my life. As a matter of fact, for about 10 years, I was involved with a meetup group. Where it was called, where we several meetup groups actually, where we played all these different kinds of board games. I learned all these new board games I'd never heard of before. They're called Euro games. There's some amazing Euro games, but that's modern games. But board games have been around for a really, really long time. The first known board games were made between somewhere between 3500 BC and 3100 BC, and most of them involve dice as well. And I believe the first known board game was from ancient Egypt. It was called what was it called? You gotta look at it. Oh, Sinet, yeah. And then there was also another ancient Egyptian game called what was it, Jackals and uh, Hounds and Jackals. I think they show that in the movie The Ten Commandments, actually. Uh, but there were a lot of other ancient games. I list a couple other ones here. There was a game called from ancient Mesopotamia around 2500 BC, and then there was a ancient Aztec game called was it Ptolemy from around 3000 BC. So games go way, way back. We've been playing games for a long time. So I guess, we always wanted to have some fun, some form of recreation, and games are a good way to do that. Anyway, so that's number 19. Number 18 was the invention of zero. And zero, maybe I should have put this one higher because zero was a really important innovation in mathematics. I don't know how many you guys realize how important zero is. I mean, we use it all the time now. We just kind of take it for granted. And you might think, what's the big deal about zero, right? It means nothing. And, I mean, it took a long time for a lot of cultures to even understand the whole concept of zero. As a matter of fact, in the ancient West, it wasn't even known until around 1200 AD. It was Fibonacci who brought back the knowledge of zero to Europe at the beginning of the 13th century. In his book Liber Abaci, also taught us the place value system we use today, the decimal system, and how to do arithmetic in it. But before that, we had face value number systems, which were much more cumbersome, like Roman numerals and Egyptian hieroglyphs and all this stuff. And we had different symbols for different, numerical quantities. They were much harder to work with. In particular, they were very difficult to multiply and divide with. So, having zero just as a placeholder made a big difference in terms of math. It made it a lot easier to do math, to do mathematical calculations. That's one advantage of having zero. Another big advantage is that once we included the concept of zero in math, a lot of things made a lot more sense. I mean, when before zero we started counting with one, and it is a little hard to imagine zero, but one of the big problems with ancient Greek math was they didn't have zero, and that was the whole reason for Zeno's paradox. It was the reason they were considered paradoxes, because the ancient Greeks couldn't understand the concept of a limit, which ultimately stemmed from their not accepting zero as a number or infinity. Once you have zero, it's kind of natural to go from zero to infinity because infinity is sort of like the reciprocal of zero. So it kind of enlarged our domain of math having zero. And there were various cultures throughout the world that developed zero at different times. I think the first use of zero was in ancient Egypt. Actually, I think they just used it as a placeholder, but it didn't really catch on. There's some noted Egyptian hieroglyphics that use zero. I guess they didn't stick with it, but then the ancient Mayans had a shell symbol for zero, and they had a place value system based 20. Unfortunately, their civilization didn't last. It died out around 950 AD. And then, it was used in ancient India and ancient China. And I think, because it was used in India and in China way before it was used in the West, they were way ahead of us in math for a long time, and also in the Middle East. The Arabs, the Hindu Arabic number system was the decimal system, basically. The Indians and the Arabs used, the decimal system, which included zero, and then it had to later be discovered in Europe around 1200 AD, which I think was a big reason why the West was so far behind during the Middle Ages. So zero was very, very important, and I probably put it too low on my list, actually. Number 17, theater. This is an art form. It's a kind of a participatory art form. We call it performance art. And I really like theater. I mean, I like going to plays, and plays were just the beginning of theater. I mean, and the first plays were performed in ancient Greece around 500 BC. They had the first known theaters, and they built these big amphitheaters, and they had the first drama and I think the first comedy, and they had the first actors, on stage, and that turned into a worldwide form of performing arts, and it evolved into other things too, like dance and eventually cinema, and I guess stage performances, rock concerts. I mean, that all came from theater. So I think theater was a very, very important invention. And number 16, money. I mean, I don't think we can deny the importance of money in our society. I mean, I think all of us here have been using money all of our lives, and for all the bad things people say about money, people have even said money is the root of all evil. And there are a lot of bad human traits associated with greed. I don't think the problem is money, though. I think the problem more is just our human failings. That we tend to be greedy. We want more and more, so we want as much money as possible. But I don't think it's money's fault. I mean, if you just think about the practicality of money, it's pretty obvious. I mean, what were we doing before money? We were bartering, right? I mean, trade. I don't know when trade was invented, but when we first started trading, we would trade goods for other goods. We'd trade cows for sheep, or we'd trade sheep for whatever. Sheep for clothing, or I mean, you just trade what you wanted for what you had, and that was very inconvenient. Sometimes you'd have to do it several times, do several transactions. But the nice thing about money is it's universal. We have this stuff called money, and there's different forms of money. There's a lot of different forms of money. As a matter of fact, the first form of money was just notes on. It was like notes of debt on clay tablets, which kind of surprised me when I learned this. In Mesopotamia again, around 3000 BC, the Mesopotamians were the first known people to use money in just the form of recorded debt. And later, we started developing currency. I think shortly afterwards, coins were made, and coins, usually they use valuable metals for coins like gold or silver, and they made nice pictures on them, and I think at first only the rich people could afford them or could have them. But, they started having an intrinsic value, which was kind of the value of the metal in them. But then we started being a little more abstract about it. We started making bills, notes, and of course, bills are just pieces of paper, but they have a number written on them, which indicates the value. So there's sort of an agreed upon value of a banknote or a bill, dollar bills, $5 bills, $10 bills. You get the idea, and then, I mean, money used to be backed by gold. Nixon got us off the gold standard in 1971, and ever since, at least in the United States, money has had a purely psychological value. And nowadays, we don't even use dollar bills that much anymore. We use more, we started using credit cards, I think, in the 1950s, and then, we started just using, computerized money. I mean, we do bank transactions at the ATM. A lot of times it's just a matter of an electronic transaction. And now we have a thing called cryptocurrency. It's actually money that's generated on computers. And I think that's going to be the currency of the future. So money has a long history. I think we're going to have money for a while, unfortunately. Maybe someday in the future we'll have a world without money like they predict on Star Trek. But I don't think that's going to happen during any of our lifetimes, unfortunately. So at least for now, we're stuck with money and probably capitalism and greed and all that other nice stuff. But anyway, for better for worse, money was a very important invention, obviously. Number 15, the bell. I think we can all agree that bells were very important, right? I mean, the bells were used as a way to, signal people. I mean, you obviously big bells on churches, bells on clock towers, they tell you what time it is. Bells, they ring a bell, when a couple gets married, or they ring a bell before a mass, before a sermon. They kind of, signal people in society that something important is going on. Of course, we have other kinds of bells too. We have alarm bells, fire bells. We have a lot of different kinds of bells. And, later in more modern society, we started having, telephone bells, and we started using bells on certain instruments like tambourines, and you got the idea. I mean, bells just kind of is a way to make a sound that kind of signals us that something important is going on. So anyway, that's bells. Number 14, the book. Uh, I don't think we can deny that books are really important. I mean, books are kind of synonymous with education. And, most of us learn to read when we start school around first grade. We read fairy tales when we're kids, and we start reading ourselves in school. And, I mean, it's hard to imagine our society without books. Uh, I think just about every society that doesn't have books would be a primitive society. I think there are some, but they're kind of just nomadic societies. There aren't too many of them left. So books are very, very important, obviously. And the first books, they weren't bounded books. Those are called codex. The books we use today are known as codex books. I hardly ever heard that word used, but those were invented somewhere between the second and fourth century. But before that, we just had papyrus scrolls. But those were very useful. I mean, the Library of Alexandria in ancient Egypt, or ancient Greece, I guess. Alexandria was in Egypt, but I think it was part of the ancient Greek Empire. That was around, to about 200 BC. Eventually, was burned down, but they had these big papyrus scrolls that had pretty much all the ancient knowledge that was known at that time. So I guess you consider those books. I mean, the way I think of a book is just a convenient, compact form of written information that's recorded and accessible. So those are books, and we can't deny their importance. And I had bells, I had books. Guess what's next? Candles. Bell, book, and candle. I don't know if many of you guys recognize that reference. There was a very popular movie in the 50s called Bell, Book, and Candle, starring Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak, but that's a little bit of a sidetrack. Anyway, so candle. I think we can all agree that a candle was a very important invention of ancient times. I mean, it was a very convenient source of light. I mean, think about it. Before electric lighting, what did we do when we wanted to see at night, or when we want to see indoors? When it was dark. Well, we didn't have too many options. We had oil lamps, but oil lamps were kind of inconvenient. You couldn't really move them around. The most convenient portable source of light was the candle. And a candle is a very simple invention. It's just a stick made of wax with a wick, going through it, and you light the wick, and it burns, and most of them burn for a few hours, and obviously they're very convenient. We still use them today. I mean, they're not as important today as they used to be, but they're used in churches. They're used in, religious, rituals, and also, romantic candlelight dinners, and a lot of other things we use candles for. We also use them if we have a blackout. It's good to have some candles in the house, so, or at least a flashlight. So, in case the power goes out, you can light some candles and you can see. Anyway, I should mention just one more thing about that. I don't know how many guys realize this, but there was a big blackout in New York City in 1964. I think the city was blacked out for like a week. And it was also 9 months later, they had the biggest baby boom in their history. So you can imagine what people are doing when the lights went out. Anyway, enough of that. But number 12, plumbing. I don't think we can argue that plumbing was a really important invention. I mean, and it's a lot older than people realize. I mean, most of us think of plumbing as sort of part of our modern society, running water. I mean, there were societies, even in America, that didn't have running water for a long time. I think in the Old West, people didn't have running water. I know the Mormons didn't, but actually, plumbing's a lot older than you might think. The first pipes known were made around 4000 BC. The first sewer pipes, and these were in Mesopotamia again. And I think probably most of you know that the ancient Roman Empire had a big plumbing system underground. They used lead pipes, unfortunately. Some people think that the Roman Empire, part of the reason the Roman Empire fell was because of lead poisoning from the lead pipes. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think that would be responsible for the whole fall. But it was a problem for them. I guess a lot of Romans got sick from lead pipes. Uh, but I mean, the existence of pipes, think about it, toilets. I mean, what were people doing before we had toilets? And, I guess toilet was a later invention. I might put that during the Euro. I think that was probably maybe a medieval invention. I'm not sure. Either medieval or early Renaissance. That one will have to be on my list. But, I mean, we wouldn't have had toilets without underground plumbing. And think about how important running water is. I mean, we use it to bathe, we use it to clean ourselves, not just ourselves. We use it to clean surfaces, to wash dishes. We wouldn't be able to do any of that stuff without running water. So we need a underground plumbing system to do all that. So plumbing is obviously very important. And number 11, the pulley. This is actually one of three simple machines on my list, the first of them. The pulley is a really ingenious invention, I think. I mean, you can double them up or triple them up, and you can pull. But the way they work is, you want to lift a heavy object, and you do it by pulling down. That's one advantage. It's a lot easier to pull down than to lift up. And also, when you double and triple them up, or how to do this how many times you want, you gain a big. I forget what that's called. I learned this a long time ago, but you don't have to use nearly as much force. Um, I think that's called something advantage, mechanical advantage, or something like that. The factor by which the force decreases. Force times distance. Work is force times distance. You have to pull a lot farther to move a brick up, a heavy brick, but you don't have to use nearly as much force. That's the idea of a simple machine, and a pulley is just one example of a simple machine. And the first pulleys were built a long time ago, made a long time ago. They were made in ancient Egypt in the 12th dynasty, sometime between 1991 BC and 1802 BC. So, uh, anyway, obviously, a very important invention. And number 10, stone columns. Stone columns were a really important ancient architectural innovation. They were mostly used, I think, in ancient Greece, but they're also used in ancient Egypt. But they allowed for these big, beautiful structures like the Parthenon, shown here. I mean, most of the ancient Greek temples, I don't think just ancient Greece, but also probably ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Samaria, probably in Asia too. I think most big buildings in ancient times were built, they stood on these big columns. And, the first columns were built, I think, around 2600 BC in ancient Egypt. And I think I've actually seen some of them. I was at the Temple of Karnak in ancient Egypt back in and not ancient Egypt, but in Egypt in 1980, and I saw some big ancient columns there that held up some big, huge temple, back in ancient Egypt. So, pretty amazing stuff. And number 9, sundial. I think the sundial was a really great invention because it was the first accurate timepiece. I mean, it allowed for accurate measurement of time, and sundials are a lot more accurate than you might think. I mean, sundials all throughout the year, they I think the most they're off by is about 15 minutes. So you can tell the time of day within about 15 minutes, which is probably good enough for most of the ancient people. They didn't have really tight schedules like we do today. They didn't have 9 to 5 jobs. I mean, it wasn't as important for them to know the exact time. Uh, but so I think they were good enough for ancient times, and they also look really beautiful too. But I think it's pretty obvious what some of the disadvantages of sundials are. For one thing, you can only use them during the daytime, and also you can only use them whenever the sun is shining. So their usefulness is limited by that. But like I said, they were the first accurate timepieces made, and so I like sundials. And the first known sundials came from ancient Egypt around 3500 BC. Number 8, mathematics. I had to put this one in here. Even though I'm a mathematical Platonist, I mean, there's a big debate over whether or not math is invented or discovered. I'm in the camp where I think math is discovered, and I actually have a lot of reasons for believing this. I'm not going to go into that in this video. I think I made another video called "Is Mathematics Invented or Discovered?" You might want to watch that one. But, whether or not it was invented or discovered, I think we can all agree that at least math as we know it today as a human discipline, something that's taught in school, it was invented. I mean, think about it. In the Stone Age, there weren't math classes. People weren't being taught math lessons. We didn't really have math concepts in our head because we hadn't invented them yet. Maybe the math was there. We just, I guess we hadn't discovered it, which means we hadn't invented the text, we hadn't invented the concepts in our mind. That's what I mean by the invention of mathematics. And if you want to think of math as an invention in that sense, then I guess you could say the first math was done around 3000 BC, and that was in the form of these clay tablets that were, again, discovered, I believe, in Mesopotamia, or maybe the Babylonians. I don't remember which. Yeah, the Mesopotamia. Babylon. I think the Babylonians were actually the best of the ancient mathematicians, but they came later. They also used clay tablets, by the way, but they had a very good number system. They used base 60. You could even argue that they used zero, even though zero was just a placeholder. They had a place valued system, and they were really, really good mathematicians. And I remember once I took a class in the history of mathematics, and I remember I learned about some poor kid in ancient. They don't know this for a fact, but they found an ancient Babylonian clay tablet from around, I think it was around 2000 BC, with a really, really complicated math problem on it. And it was debated why the Babylonians cared about this problem. And I think most people, the consensus was that it was a homework exercise for some poor Babylonian kid to try to solve. I think even one of us today would have a hard time solving this problem. But anyway, so yeah, we would record math problems on these clay tablets, and you could do mathematical calculations on them too. So that was the first math. Anyway, number 7, the boat. I mean, this is obviously a very important invention, right? Boats were the beginning of navigation. I mean, boats a form of transportation that allows us to travel on water. And obviously that was very important to ancient people. And I mean, we know the Native Americans had canoes, and we know that a lot of other ancient and even some societies we might call primitive had boats. But the first known boats come from the Neolithic Stone Age, which was around 8000 BC. And the reason I'm calling it ancient rather than Stone Age is because, the way I decided to do my timeline, 10,000 BC to 500 AD. I guess the first boats that were discovered were after what I'm calling the Neolithic Revolution. So I don't know when the first Native Americans built the first boats, maybe before this, but we don't have any record of it. But I guess I want to say one more thing about some of these ancient boats. I learned something maybe 10 or 20 years ago. Um, the Polynesians, they were kind of I don't know if you call them primitive, but they were not very well developed society, kind of like the Native Americans, and they made canoes, but they were able to canoe amazing distances. I mean, they were able to, for instance, go canoe all the way from the Philippines to Hawaii, which is about 2,000 miles. They did this in canoes. I was amazed when I learned this. I mean, they did vast distances in some of the first boats. So even with some of these very early boats that were really just hollowed up out, logs pretty much, with paddles, people could go vast distances across big bodies of water. So, you know, obviously we have much better boats now. We can go all over the world with boats. We can even have submarines. We can go under the surface of the ocean. But, these were among the first boats. So you can't deny the importance of boats. Um, and number six, the arch. And the arch, I would say, the word architecture comes from arch. So obviously, the arch was a very, very important development in construction. And the picture of the arch I show on this slide is the arch of Titus, which is in Rome. It was built in ancient Rome, probably around 2,000 years ago. Um, and the nice thing about arches is they're stable. I mean, this isn't the ideal shape of an arch. The ideal shape of an arch is a catenary, which is an upside down. It's a kind of a upside down version of a hanging chain. There's a mathematical formula for a catenary curve. I'm not going to say what it is, but the gateway, in case you're interested, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, which was built, I believe, in 1960, that is a catenary arch, and it is the most stable possible arch. But the arches the Romans made weren't bad either. They weren't ideal, but they were strong enough to hold up the Colosseum. I mean, the one nice thing about these arches, besides them being beautiful and magnificent in and of themselves, you could combine them into other really useful structures like aqueducts. Aqueducts were built by putting a bunch of arches together and have the water run on the top. And you can think of a dome as kind of like a rotated arch. That's why domes are stable. And if you look at the medieval cathedrals, they had kind of cross beam arches inside. I mean, they were very very important in the history of architecture and construction. And I think we owe most of this to the ancient Romans, but actually the first arches to be built were built a lot earlier than that. They were built in ancient Egypt, I guess during the 4th millennium BC. That would have been somewhere between 4,000 and 3,000 BC. So arches were very important in the ancient world, and they still are today. And number five, the second machine on my list, the lever or the lever. I don't know how you pronounce it, but levers were invented. I call them lever. The lever was invented around 5,000 BC. I think the first known levers were made in the Near East, and obviously they're very useful. I mean, just think about it. I mean, here's a picture. I guess this is kind of a cartoon of Archimedes lifting the earth. He had a very famous quote. He came up, Archimedes. He lived a lot later than this. He lived around, he came up with a mathematical law for how levers work. F1 x1 equals F2 x2. If you want me to write it down or say it. F is just the force on one end. Archimedes is on the right. You can think of him as applying a force F1, kind of a small force, but he's a large distance away from the fulcrum, this kind of pivoting point. So that would be the distance x1, and then you've got this big globe, which I suppose is supposed to symbolize the Earth, which has a big weight, obviously big huge weight. Yeah, that's F2, which is humongous, but then X2 is very small because it's right next to the fulcrum. So even though he's lifting a huge weight here, he doesn't have to apply much force because he's so far from the fulcrum by his own law. He doesn't have to, use that much force to lift the earth. And he did have a very famous quote. He said, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the world." So that's just kind of a cartoon of what that quote. Anyway, number four, paper. Now we're getting some really big ones here. I mean, paper. It's hard for me to imagine a world without paper. I mean, we use paper all over the place. I mean, it has a lot of uses. I just named a few here, but obviously it's used for reading and writing. Books have paper. Every kind of document you read, just about. I mean, now we read stuff on the computer, but I'd say until this millennium, most people were reading stuff that was written on paper, and a lot of what we still read is on paper. So paper has been a big part of our life for that reason. People used to read newspapers. I think some people still do. Uh, and besides that, it's used for packaging. It's used for cleaning. And I think it has a lot of other uses too. I mean, toilet paper. Come on, where would be without toilet paper? I guess we could have spritzing toilets, but I think most of us still have to use toilet paper. So thank God for paper. And it was invented. We actually know who invented it. It was a Chinese eunuch, ancient Chinese eunuch named Kai Lun. He used to be known as Tsai Lun, and it was invented in 105 AD. We even know the year. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to say how paper's made. It's made from wool pulp. I don't even know the details of how paper's made, but Kai Lun discovered the procedure for making paper, which is still used today. But now it's made in big paper mills and paper factories, so people don't have to do it by hand anymore. But he got it started. And number three, paper wouldn't be all that much good if it weren't for writing. So I think writing was really, really a key invention of ancient times, and I don't think you have to think much to understand how important writing is. I mean, everything I'm showing you right now is written down. I mean, just about all the information we get today. I guess we get verbal information, but all the recorded information. I think the key advantage of writing as as opposed to other forms of communication, at least other forms of verbal communication. Speech, I think speech is the only other, or maybe song. Those are the only other forms of verbal communication I know of. The disadvantages of speech or song is that they're not recorded. They just pass down. Yeah, you can memorize songs, you can memorize poems, and you can pass them down to your children, or you can pass them down to, that was how it was done before we had writing. But the biggest advantage of writing was we could have a permanent record. We write something down on a clay tablet or on a piece of papyrus or later pieces of paper, and we'd have a permanent record. People could look back at it, and once we had printing, you didn't have to worry about the paper, getting old. You can make as many copies of stuff as you want. So now we have written records of everything, you know. So I don't think it's hard to see the importance of writing. And I guess there's just one more thing I want to say about writing. Uh, I mean, there's different forms of writing, obviously. And I think, the basis of writing is the alphabet. And there's different alphabets throughout the world. I think most people in the West use the Roman alphabet, the one we're all familiar with 26 letters, 26 capital letters and 26 small letters. But there's a lot of different alphabets. There's the Russian alphabet and the Hebrew alphabet, and a bunch of others. And there's also still what do you call it? Like in China, I think they still use what are they called? Characters, Chinese characters, which are kind of like pictures. I mean, the first writing really was pictures. I mean, if you look at this picture on the right, this kind of shows you the evolution of alphabets. And I think all alphabets always started out as a set of pictures. And I think the pictures on top look kind of like Egyptian hieroglyphs. Egyptian hieroglyphs actually evolved into an alphabet. They evolved into the Roman alphabet eventually. But the difference with Chinese characters, they didn't evolve into an alphabet. They stayed pictures. And, I think they did change. The way they're shaped has changed. But there's something like 5,000 characters in the Mandarin alphabet. And it just seems to me like it would be almost impossible to learn. Of course, I've never learned Mandarin, so I don't know firsthand. I know that pronunciation is very important, and I think the way that each piece of each character is written makes a difference in the pronunciation, probably in the meaning too. But you know, I guess at the risk of insulting some Asians here, I'm going to say that I think that having a phonetic alphabet is a big, huge advantage because it means we don't need so many symbols. I mean, the Roman alphabet only has 26 letters, and by making the letters have a particular sound, we can make words that just combine those sounds, those syllables, and we don't have to have each word have a different symbol, which I think is a big advantage. Anyway, enough of that. But we can't deny writing was really important. And one thing I think is kind of unfortunate about writing is I mean, we don't know because of writing, because writing is a permanent record. We don't know much about history before writing because we don't have written records of it. I mean, the only records we have of anything before writing are archaeological records. We can dig things up. We can dig up ancient tools. We can dig up ancient burial sites and all that stuff. Even parts of the world that aren't so ancient, like Native American sites. But we don't know all that much about them because there's no permanent written records of any of their history. And also another problem is I think we're pretty vain. We're pretty chauvinistic. So we tend to think that whatever happened after writing was a lot more advanced than what happened before. But we don't know that for a fact. I mean, for all we know, there might have been some ancient, primitive, or I think more likely ancient, after, 10,000 BC. But, there may have been some ancient societies that didn't have writing that were a lot more advanced in other ways we just don't know about. I think that might include the Native Americans as well. So we shouldn't be so vain just because they didn't have writing to assume that they were more primitive. That's a very convenient thing for us to believe, and a good excuse for killing them off, which was done throughout a lot of our history. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. But number two, the wheel. You might be surprised I didn't list this as number one. A lot of people think the wheel was the greatest invention of all time, not just ancient times. And, there's a lot of good arguments for that. I mean, wheels are everywhere. I mean, wheels revolutionized transportation, obviously. Just about every form of transportation, at least every form of land transportation, relies on wheels. It's obvious why wheels are so important because it's a lot easier to roll things than to drag them or to lift them, and you can combine wheels with axles, and you can lift big loads on top of carts and things so that you can move really heavy, really heavy loads really easily just by rolling them with wheels. And but and obviously wheels have evolved throughout our history. I mean, now we have wheels on all these other much more advanced forms of transportation, like cars and planes and trains, you name it. I mean, they all have wheels. Uh, but what's interesting, I think, about wheels is that wheels were not first used for transportation. They were first used for pottery. The first wheels that were made around 4200 to 4000 BC, and they were pottery wheels, which are still used today to make pottery. The wheel. That's how you make these beautiful pots that are kind of symmetric, about a central axis because you spin them on a wheel. You kind of form them with your hands and you make them look round. But so that is a really important use of the wheel, but they weren't used in transportation until around 3500 BC. I think that's around the time the first carts. I don't know what the first forms of transportation were that used wheels, but probably a form of cart or maybe a rickshaw or something. I don't know what they were, but you know, anyway. So wheels are obviously very important, and so if wheels are number two, can you guess what's number one? Well, I think was even greater invention than the wheel in ancient times was the thing that started it all, agriculture. I mean, agriculture was the invention that got us out of the Stone Age. It was responsible for the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 BC. Once we could start farming, once we could start growing our own food, making our own farms, growing our own wheat or corn or whatever, and raising our own animals and killing them and eating them and all that. Once we could do all that, then we weren't just at the mercy of nature. Before we were doing any of that, what were we doing? We're just hunting and gathering. We had to hunt wild animals, which was really dangerous. So, a lot of people got killed doing that. And we were relying on, being able to find enough to eat, if it wasn't meat, enough fruit, enough, stuff growing in the ground, whatever. We just eat whatever we could find. But once we started growing it ourselves, it was much more organized. We could plan. I think another advantage of agriculture, you could plan for you could plan the harvest. You could harvest your food particular type of year, and usually in the fall, and then it would grow by the spring. You could plant trees. You could grow crops. You could kind of plan for how much food you were going to get when, and you could even plan for if you had a drought, things like that. So it kind of gave society a lot more structure, and I think it really allowed us to thrive just in an amazing way. And like I said, maybe the reason why we think the wheel was a greater invention than agriculture is because the wheel kind of came around this time of writing. I mean, we have written records of using wheels. I guess we don't have as much written records of having agriculture before then. But I think agriculture was actually probably more important. So anyway, that's my list of what I think were the top 20 inventions of ancient times. Thank you for watching. Keep thinking, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.